In this movie, I'm going to show you how it can be beneficial to have an initialize file that takes care of loading in a lot of other files, and also how to establish some path constants that'll help you out. Now, in the last movie, you saw how we had to make some alterations to this require once to put another ... in it as soon as we created this admin directory over here. And we even had problems with the style sheets and locating the right style sheet as well. We've kind of been laboring a little more than we needed to over finding some of these files. And so I want to try and clean that up a little bit. It also should set off some alarm bells in your head that we're repeating ourselves so many times by requiring these same files over and over. What it would be better to do is have one file that would initialize everything for us. And that's what we're going to do. I'm going to create a new file here, and I'll save it in the includes folder, and we'll just call it initialize.php. And I'll put my PHP tags in it to start with. Let's take all of this here at the top, and we'll just copy it, move it into initialize, and hit paste. Back over here, that means I can reduce all of this down to just initialize. And at the top of every one of my pages, all I have to do is say initialize. And once it does that, it'll load up everything that it needs to load up. So already we've made it better. And if we decide that we need to take out one of our classes or add in a new class, it'll suddenly instantly become available to all of those pages if they need it. Now you may be thinking, well, I don't necessarily need all of those classes every time. So am I losing something in efficiency by loading them all in? You're losing a little bit, but PHP is very fast with loading in these classes and everything. That doesn't take very long. It takes a lot longer to do things like go to the database. So speed is not going to be as much of a concern for us as code organization, and we can break it up and modularize it a little more if we find that speed becomes a problem. We still have this ... here. We can take that out because now this is actually in the same folder, right? So we'll go through each one of these, database and user, and we actually had one more earlier, if you'll remember, which was config. And so we'll go ahead and load that in at the same time. Database was loading it in because it needed it, but I might as well go ahead and load in the config file here. Now what I want to do is come up with some definitions for some paths that we can use that'll help us to locate files easily and see how that'll help us. I'm going to start out by defining the core paths. The first thing I'm going to define is a constant for ds. And if it's already defined, then I'll make it null. But otherwise, I'm going to define it as the directory separator. That's a special PHP predefined constant. If you're on Windows, it'll be a backslash. If you're on Unix, it'll be a /. But PHP takes care of figuring out which one it ought to be when it boots up. So that'll make sure that any path that we write, we're able to use ds, and it'll work regardless of what file system we're using. The second one I want to set up is site root. Let me just make this a little wider. There we are. So if the site root hasn't already been defined, then I'm going to define it. And I'm going to define it as being the directory separator, and then users, ds, Kevin, so on, sites, photo gallery, the path to my application, basically. Yours will definitely be different from mine, so you'll want to work that out so it's the same as yours. If you're on a Mac or on Unix, you can go into the command line, and you can try and navigate to that place, to where your site is. Let's say photo gallery. And then it shows it there to me, but you can also do pwd, and that'll show you the list. That will work on Unix. You also can navigate there. You can go into the hard drive, into users, into Kevin, and so on, till you get to the path. So we're talking about an absolute file system path. That's important. It's the file system, not the web server path, but the file system path. This is for PHP to locate the files that it needs. So now, for example, I could tell it, in order to find those includes files, no matter where the file is that's asking for it, the way to get there is to go into the site root and then into includes. In fact, I'm going to be referencing those include files so often, I'm going to go ahead and make a path for that as well. So lib path is going to be the path to the library. That's why the lib is from. And I'm going to say it's the site root and then the directory separator and includes. And that's how we can find that. And then we can make use of that. Let's say lib path and the directory separator again, and config, functions, session, database, and user. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and just paste in some comments that I had pre-prepared for these, that I'm going to load in the config file first, and that's just to get all those configurations set up. Then I'm going to load in the basic functions so that everything after that can use them, then the session and the database, those core objects, and then any of my database related classes. Those will come last. The order is important. And if I do need to change the order, I can just do it in this file. Now notice that I can't define these in the config file if I want to also be able to use libpath here. It won't have it defined unless we've done this step up here. So just take note of that. The second thing I want to point out to you is that back over here in the login file, we can't use it here either, because When this page first loads, it has to know how to get to that initialize.php. Once it gets there, then everything gets defined and it's taken care of. But we don't have those convenience helpers for us at this point. So where does it help us then? Let's go into database.php. Here we can use that libpath.ds, and that'll make sure that it can always find the config file. I'll just copy and paste that. And let's go into functions. We have auto load. We were looking for the function earlier. Well, here's how we could find it. We can go to the libpath and then look for the class name there. That's helpful. Let's also look in user.php, and require once database can do the same thing, the libpath and the database. So we now have a common way that we can always find the library. Once we've run that initialize file, we have those paths established for us. So that makes the top of the file a lot cleaner. But what about the style sheets and everything? For that, we're going to need to establish headers and footer layouts like we did in the essential training, and we'll do that in the next movie.